Thank you all for joining me in this session. We're going to discuss today the musculoskeletal health. First of all, we'll begin with the effects of work-related upper limb disorders, commonly known as WRULDs. Now, when we say upper limbs, we're talking about the neck, the shoulders, arms, elbows, wrists, hands, and fingers. And perhaps from your own exposure and experience at work, you will be familiar with injuries or disorders associated with these body parts. And these parts of the body usually are more prone to injuries and disorders because of the nature of work. Most of our work really is manual, whether we work in an office, whether we work in a more physically demanding environment or industry. There's a lot of stress on these body parts. So that's why they have been commonly recognized as a vulnerable and more likely part of the body to be exposed to such injuries. An example of those injuries or syndromes is repetitive strain syndrome. And the symptoms for this issue include aching pain, swollen joints, muscle fatigue, tingling and soft tissue swelling as well. Those who suffer from this syndrome as well might notice reduced mobility, so they don't have the same level of flexibility and ability to move. The muscles can become stiff after a while. They may experience cramps, loss of grip, strength as well, so they don't have the strongest hold on items. It affects as well the muscles, the tendons, the nerves, and it will eventually affect the sleep quality due to the aching pain, really. A lot of those exposed to these disorders would find it difficult to have deep and good quality of sleep. And of course, these can be acute, so experienced over a short period of time, or they can be chronic and experienced on a repetitive rate and over a long period of time. Of course, the longer the exposure, the more difficult it's going to be to recover from such issues. Now, examples or work examples where there might be a risk of work-related upper limb disorders include keyboard operation, so working in a typical office environment, assembling small components in a workshop, for example, or mechanic work, bricklaying in construction due to the repetitive movement of the body, checkout operators or cashiers, use of display screen equipment as well, again because of the strain on the neck and shoulders, and perhaps sitting for a long period of time in the same position, same posture, is going to cause such syndromes to occur. Now, the control factors all starts with the proper design, okay? And so safety by design really is the way to go for such issues. And if we want to talk about safety by design, ergonomics is an ideal concept to be familiar with. So ergonomics basically is about ensuring that the work environment, or the environment in general, whether it's for work or other activities, is suitable and adequate for the human needs, physical and mental. Okay, so we include the personal factors like the mental stress and the environment surrounding mental or psychological environment in the place, whether there is a requirement for intellectual skills that the users or the occupants in the area may not be familiar with, the body dimensions or the height of the users, for example, the task competence, so whether these users or personnel are familiar with the task and with the equipment. The gender as well plays a role, whether we have pregnant persons in the area or carrying out these kind of work, because of course pregnancy is going to make the individual less physically fit and more vulnerable to injuries. Also, whether these individuals have been trained before on proper use and safe operation of tools and equipment. And also the presence of medical conditions, so back injuries, for example, or previous syndromes that have occurred, perhaps musculoskeletal syndromes. We also look at the machine and associated equipment as well. So what kind of machinery is available to use? Trolleys perhaps will make it less stressful on the body. If we look at an office environment where most of us are familiar with it, what kind of chairs are we providing? Are they ergonomic? Are they adjustable? And then finally, we look at the interface as well. So items like controls. Again, if we want to talk about interface, a laptop or a computer is a very good example. So we look at the controls or keys, the panels or displays, the gauges, the seating, if it's available or not, and if yes, then is there back support and arm support? Is it adjustable? And with hand tools as well, whether there is proper handles to use the piece of equipment in a comfortable and in a safe way. We also look at the work conditions, so the environment in terms of humidity, lighting, temperature, noise, and pollutants. All of these affect the mental and physical fitness of the users. The interaction, so issues like the work rate, so whether, for example, there is excessive long working hours causing issues like fatigue or stress, the work posture, and systems of work like training, repetition of the same task. Of course, with the repetition, we'll have more likelihood for injury. And also whether the task is strenuous or physically demanding, okay? If you have a highly demanding task like manual handling, for example, handling heavy objects, you'll need to plan for the personnel to have maybe like periodic rest or break times. Moving on to the next point, which is, as we mentioned, rests, breaks, the shift pattern as well. So again, how often and how long is the exposure to these hazards? And finally, supervision. With supervision, it will allow the management or the supervisors to intervene and to monitor the behaviors and the work methods perhaps, and try to correct it if there is any issue. Now, if we want to talk about the risk factors in terms of work-related upper limb disorders, first of all, we need to look at the task, if it's repetitive, strenuous, as we mentioned, if it requires stretching, because with stretching, we lose a lot of our strength, okay? And if it requires twisting, for the same reason, a lot of back injuries particularly happen when there is stretching or twisting of the body, because that reduces the strength or the fitness really of this persons to carry or handle objects. The environment like lighting, glare, which is like light reflection on a screen, and temperature. Temperature has been associated with reduced physical fitness as well, same with humidity. And finally, with equipment, if they are not adjustable, of course, they are not ideal in that case, and they present a hazard in their own right. We need to also look at the premises, so the actual location, what kind of layout we have. Layout has to do with perhaps reducing the distance or reducing or enhancing the dimensions of the workstation or the workplace. Heat insulation, if there is a risk of extremely low temperatures, because again, with extremes of temperature, we lose a lot of physical fitness. Shades as much as possible to reduce perhaps exposure to sunlight. Smooth but non-slip floors as well to avoid any slips and trips hazard. Also, the design of workstation. Now we're talking about offices, so we reduce reach as much as possible. So we try to design it in a scientific way, and there are several guidance. If you Google ergonomic design for offices, you'll find several standards and guidance documents to help you identify the ideal dimensions. The height should be suitable, of course, the fixtures, displays, so the screens and the chairs as well. All of these factors need to be considered. In terms of the organization or the management parts and systems, we need to perhaps combine tasks. We need to have group work to reduce the load on particular individuals, have rotations, again to reduce exposure, and introduce ongoing and like systematic break system to help those individuals to recover. And finally, having welfare facilities. Welfare is a human right, really. It covers all the basic necessities of our personnel or individuals on site, so providing proper toilets, drinking water, rest areas, eating areas, and first aid kits. And all of these really are legal requirements. It's the minimum basic requirements you'll need to have in a workplace. In terms of lighting as well, we need to have proper skylights and perhaps artificial light as well, relocating lights to suit the work task, because in some tasks where we are required to focus, maybe you'll need to have localized source of lighting. Also light-colored walls to help to reflect the light as well, and that affects the psychological part of workers as well. And also avoiding glare. So this has to do with light engineering, really, especially if you are using reflective surfaces like screens or displays. We need to have an intelligent and ergonomic design, again, for lighting. It's the same with material handling, so we need to have passage borders, multiple shelves as well, mobile racks to avoid the need for workers perhaps to climb or to stretch, carts and lifts to avoid the need for manual handling. And also isolate hazards as much as possible, having covers over chemicals, for example, to prevent spills and leaks, having proper guards on machinery or sharp corners, machine feeding devices, which is basically something like a push stick, for example, to push the items or material through a machine without exposing the body part or the hand to a mechanical hazard. And also isolate heat sources, because these, again, in their own right, they present a risk of extreme temperature. In terms of display screen equipment, so again, a computer screen, we need to analyze workstation risk to reduce the level of risk. So again, we introduce breaks. We encourage workers to take frequent breaks to rest their eyes and stretch their body on a regular basis, including and also ensuring that workstations meet the minimum requirements. And when we discuss requirements, as I mentioned, there are standards for the design and really fixing those chairs and tables, and we need to ensure that our staff are aware of it, because in so many times we invest as management, we invest a lot in providing suitable workstations and like adjustable chairs and screens and all of that, but we fail to inform and make our workers really aware of how to use these in a proper way. Also planning work activities to allow for breaks and ongoing change of task, eye or vision tests, and also providing information and training to our staff on a regular basis. Of course, we have a question here, which is identifying the typical signs and symptoms that might be experienced by affected individual. This is like a revision or recap of the points we mentioned, and also identifying the factors to increase or that could increase the risk of work-related upper limb disorders. Now, I advise you strongly to pause this video for a minute, try to complete these questions, and then go back to the next sections. This will be a useful way to recap the points that we have covered. So, moving on to manual handling risks. So these kind of activities would cover lifting and lowering objects, carrying, moving, pushing and pulling, supporting a load, dropping and throwing. And all of these activities you would find in any workplace and even at home, and so many times in supermarkets while we're doing grocery shops. So it's really one of the most common causes of injury in the workplace and in general, okay? And these are just examples of these activities. The common injuries associated with manual handling include muscular sprains and strains, back injuries like a slipped disc, for example, which I know is very common among even the younger age groups as well, due to the really low levels of awareness on proper manual handling, which is unfortunate. Trapped nerve injuries causing severe pain, especially in the thighs and upper leg. Hernia, cuts, bruises, and abrasion due to sharp corners, in loads, fractures as well, and finally rheumatism, which can also be caused by manual handling in many cases. If we want to assess the level of risk of manual handling, we need to look at the word TILE. The word TILE is an abbreviation of 4 risk factors. Okay? Starts with a T, which is the task. Okay? How is the task going to be done? What does it involve? And then moving on to I, which is the individual. Okay, so who is going to do it? All the personal factors associated with this individual. The load, so what needs to be moved, what is the weight, what is the shape, etc. And finally, the environment, where the task is going to be done, the height, the dimensions, etc. As I mentioned, in terms of the task, we look at the level of force required, the repetition. So if someone, his only job really is to carry and move objects all day long for 8 or 12 hours a day, we have a very high level of frequency of exposure, and the likelihood of injury is going to be high there as a result. Whether there is rest periods, the height of the lift, the distance from the body, whether there is vibration, and whether there are tools and equipment available for help. If we want to reduce the risk associated with the task, we need to reorganize the layout of the place, change the task design, maybe have the loads near to the body to reduce stretching and to support. It will give more strength to the body and ability to lift. And we include a lot of training. Training really helps with handling these tasks in a better way, reducing the frequency, consider team handling, so having it as a tandem lift, and also mechanical assistance if possible. If we look at the individual, so factors like gender, age, physique, or body dimensions, fitness, whether there are pre-existing medical conditions, as you can see here, height, and obesity. All of these issues and factors, we take them into account, and we try to reduce these factors by ensuring that we choose the right person for the task, and also check to ensure that this person it's safe for him or her to carry such activities, take into account pre-existing medical conditions like previous back injuries or muscle injuries, and also providing information and training as well. This would really help to ensure that we have a proper way to conduct the work. And then we also look at the load, so the weight of this load, how much does it weigh? That's a defining factor, and there are loads with extremely, like the weight is so high that there's no way that we can handle it. There's no human really can lift such an amount of weight, and that's why really before trying to attempt to handle a weight, it's essential and crucial to look at the label and to ensure that you have somewhat of an idea of how much does it weigh. That's one of the principles and basics of manual handling. Whether it has handles or not, which will make it easier to move, whether it's rigid like a box or flexible like a rice sack. If it's flexible, it's more difficult to handle as well. If you have loads moving in a box, if you have livestock or chickens, for example, and you're carrying it, it's going to be difficult to control. The center of gravity, whether there are sharp edges, again, increasing the risk of cuts and bruises, and also the size and the shape of this load. So if you have a load that is very light in weight, but it's extremely big in size, like for example, a wood panel, okay, very thin, very light, but it's really big, and it will prevent the person carrying out the task to see clearly in front of them, and therefore, again, there is a risk of accidents and injuries occurring as a result. To reduce the risk of the load, if we look at it, we need to ensure that the loads are lighter and smaller as much as possible. They are easier to grab, adding handles, making them more stable. They are less harmful to grasp or less damaging to grasp, and also automation. Okay, so perhaps we can have a forklift in place. We can have. It's always good to go back to the hierarchy of control measures, which will guide us into perhaps engineering controls like several solutions, use of machinery and vehicles, and also use lifting devices as we were discussing earlier. Finally, we look at the environment. So factors to consider in environment include the space available, whether there are obstructions like steps or slopes, the floor, if it's slippery or if it can cause tripping hazards, if it's humid or not, because humidity will make it easier to drop and slip the load. Ventilation, if it's proper or not, the level of temperature, because we mentioned earlier that temperature can affect the fitness and body strength, and the lighting levels. Again, if we have a better lighting level, it will be easier to move and maneuver around in the workplace. Of course, in terms of risk reduction, we need to manage all of the points we discussed. So we have suitable lighting and temperature, control the humidity, adequate space in terms of width and height, housekeeping, avoiding slips and trips, workbenches at the right height to prevent workers having to bend their back, the layout of tasks, and also avoid requirement to twist and stretch. Okay, so basically we look at each point and how we can mitigate it as much as possible. We can also consider load handling equipment, and there is plenty of options thanks to technology. There is plenty of options we can look at as management. So we can have hand-powered hydraulic hoists, as we can see here, trolleys. We have sometimes hoists for lifting patients, as we'll see in the next slides, and it's used a lot in the healthcare, like clinics and hospitals. Roller conveyors and elevators used again in manufacturing plants and in aviation as well for luggage. It's one of the best really examples of engineering solutions. So here in this slide you can see different kinds of powered and non-powered lifting and handling equipment. You can also have conveyors and tracks, etc. Okay, all of these are really used in different industries, and they give you inspiration or ideas on how to control the risk of manual handling. Another example here is having a raised pallet to reduce bending. We can also have a curb laying device. Instead of having a worker having to bend on a very frequent rates, we have a machine or a tool to do all of the risky parts of the work. Now, the issue with load handling equipment is oftentimes, because they're very common, they are involved in accidents, and they do cause injuries as well. It's one of the most common causes of accidents in a workplace. So lifting trucks particularly, the hazard associated with them can be overturning or rollover, being overloaded, collisions with a structure or with another vehicle, silent operation. So perhaps if we have a pedestrian in the area or another vehicle, they will not be aware of the operation of such a vehicle. Uneven road surface causing, again, rollover, for example. Overhead obstructions if we have limited headspace, loss of a load, okay, if the load has not been secured properly, inadequate maintenance. Sometimes it's used as a work platform, which is not acceptable. A common example of that is a forklift, and I have seen that in industries, across different industries, because it's easy and convenient. It has been considered culturally within organizations as a work platform, which of course is not acceptable and it's not safe. Overspeeding, especially if we have reduced monitoring and supervision in place. Also the presence of pedestrians in the workplace. If we can have a system to physically put barriers between pedestrians and vehicles, we can overcome a lot of these issues. We can also have issues with dangerous stacking and loss of stability, so improperly or imbalanced loading of these trucks. It carries passengers sometimes, and again, if you are familiar with forklifts, particularly in a workplace, you see these kind of behaviors in a lot of workplaces. The battery charging causing issues with fire and explosion. Noise, a lot of them are really noisy, and they present a hazard in their own right. There's vibration because you have a machine moving and operating on a regular basis, and we also have manual handling as part of the operation and maintenance of this vehicle, so changing batteries, gas cylinders, etc. Now, if we want to talk about the controls in order to have a proper use of lifting equipment and vehicles in general, we need to first of all ensure that it has been examined and inspected by competent persons or parties. Usually it's a third-party inspection certificate that would be required, especially with cranes. If you have a well-controlled organization and a proper system in place, this will need to be checked before the use of, or even planning really, the lift operation. So we need to have it to ensure that it has been inspected, all the lifting accessories associated with it, if you have slings or shackles, etc. It has been calculated in a scientific way, proper way to avoid any kind of surprises later on while operating, and also having proper documentation and reports. If you look like in the news, or if you look in even in YouTube, if you Google lifting accidents or failures, you will see catastrophes happening, because while it's great as an engineering solution, really, I feel like it's not really well managed in a lot of parts of the world or organizations. So it is a common cause of accidents, unfortunately. So that brings us to the end of this module. Thank you all for joining me in this session. I hope it was useful and beneficial.